Oh, I don't have any slides. I don't have any slides. Hi, thank you for having me. I'm Chris. I'm from Canada. Worked at a company that most of you have probably heard of called Research in Motion, or BlackBerry. Just give me a sense of audience in terms of who I'm speaking to. I'm going to talk about disruption, but I want to make sure I tell a relevant story. How many of you guys or guys and girls would consider yourselves either entrepreneurs or working in a startup? So good half, more than half. Okay. So so I come from Canada, which has a lot more in common than Latvia than you'd think. Even though we look like a big country when you look at the map, we're beside the biggest economic power in the world, and so we're very, very small in comparison. We suffer from lots of inferiority complex and things like that. And generally on the world stage of technology, we're pretty dismissed or written off. I mean, who would ever think that the smartphone would be invented in a place like Canada? Then again, who would ever think that a service like Skype would get invented in a place like Estonia, right? So maybe it's not so far-fetched for you guys. Anyway, I ran corporate development at Research in Motion for 13 years, bought probably about 50 companies, licensed technology from probably about 500 more companies. I'm going to tell a quick story tonight about disruption and the luck and the things that went right for us to do one thing well in a long history and story of a company that did many things well and also did many things very terribly. So back in 2003, myself and two of my friends at RIM, we all just had babies. So our wives were at home with newborn babies. It was summer, and if any of you have kids, you'll understand this. Inevitably, whenever one of us would call home to ask how things were going, of course, the baby either had just fallen asleep or just thrown up or something, and you were interrupting. You know, calls became extremely inconvenient, and my wife would call me back, and again, I would be in a meeting. She'd want me to pick up 3 things at the store, and I'd forget because I didn't sleep the night before because the baby was crying. I'm sure those of you who are parents will understand. And so the 3 of us were brainstorming, and we were trying to think, how can we fix this problem? I mean, we just hated the interruption of phone calls, both making and receiving. And, you know, we were living in this data-driven world at RIM, at BlackBerry. And so we started off with what the original thing we were thinking of was turning the synchronousness of phone calls and making it asynchronous. How can you take a phone call and make it asynchronous? Well, you need some way to acknowledge that, yes, I've read your message, or yes, I've seen what you've said or heard what you've said, and this is my response. And, you know, we thought about push to talk and other, you know, instant messaging services that were out there. But all the instant messaging services that were out there at the time had a concept of presence, so you were signed in, but on your mobile phone you're always present. It's whether you're available to talk or not that was really the key. And so, you know, out of that was born what became known as BlackBerry Messenger, and which ultimately gave birth to pretty much the entire messaging industry. We, you know, at the time there was texting or SMS messaging for 5 or 10 cents a message, and you know, but we firmly believed that we weren't attacking instant messaging and we weren't attacking texting. We were actually going after the phone call and trying to replace phone calls with something that would be less obtrusive but have just as much fidelity. And we did that by adding the D's and R's on BlackBerry Messenger. So now if I send you a message, I know you've read it, you know that I know you've read it. There's no ambiguity in that acknowledgement. One of the funny things I can tell you, But we built this, we didn't build this planning to change the world. We built this, frankly, to talk to our wives who are home with babies. And we had a very, very, very focused initial target group for this. And the first place I tested it was actually at Disney World in Florida. I was there with my wife and my mom. My mom had never had a cell phone before, so I gave her a BlackBerry phone. She'd never used anything like this. And we had 3 kids, 3 adults, so inevitably you just split up during the day. And I remember one time in particular, we were on this Peter Pan ride. I was with my daughter on this Peter Pan ride, and the guy in the car in front of me, his phone rings, and so he starts talking on the phone, and he's shouting over the music with his wife, telling her to get him a hot dog and an ice cream cone, and he'll meet her at this place after the ride, and just interrupting the scenery for everybody. And in the midst of that, I felt a little vibration in my pocket, and I just smiled because I knew there's a message there, and it could wait till the ride was over, and I could just enjoy myself. And I thought, man, we're on this ride looking at pirates, and that vision of the pirate really sort of came to me. We're going to really do something with this. And at the end of the week, my mom, the technical Luddite, said to me, she said, where do I get a BlackBerry? So she went literally the next day, bought her first cell phone, which was a BlackBerry, and it took her 2 years before she was actually making calls, but she was one of the initial proponents of BlackBerry Messenger, and that was when we began to suspect that, wow, we might have something good on our hands. The next phase we went through to launch this, the other part of the interesting story is, our company had 2 CEOs, and pretty much nothing got launched without one of the 2 bosses agreeing to it, or both of them. And neither of them really thought the BlackBerry Messenger was going to be very important. So what did we do? I found out that one of the CEOs, his kids, all had BlackBerries as well, and his kids' BlackBerries were in to get upgraded at the office. So I borrowed the kids' BlackBerries, and I loaded BlackBerry Messenger on his 2 kids' BlackBerries, added each other as contacts, and didn't say anything to anybody. And so, sure enough, about a week later, the CEO calls me into his office, and he says, so my kids got this app on their phone, they use it all the time, they think it's amazing, why haven't we launched it? And exactly the effect we wanted to have. But it was one of those things where if we'd asked permission, I don't know if we ever would have gotten it. Instead, we took a little chance and asked for forgiveness. So luck, some piracy, and laser focus on a target user group were, I think, the 3 things that led to the success and revolution of the messaging industry. And there's unfortunately lots of things that RIM did to lose that crown, both as a smartphone leader and as the inventor of messaging on smartphones. And I could talk about that for hours. But in terms of disruption, I think there's a lot of stories of disruption that are out there, and all of them tend to have a mix of luck, focus, and a little bit of being a pirate. So that's the story I wanted to leave you with today. I don't have a lot else to say. I think there's Q&A after, is there? Or? Okay, perfect.